Probably get started now. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to our RIBA Future Architects Meetup event. My name is Selasi Setufe. I am RIBA Associate Member for National Council, and I will be hosting tonight's event. Firstly, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I hope you're all well and safe wherever you are in the world. A few housekeeping bits from me. We are recording tonight's event, so those that can't join us live will be able to watch afterwards. We'll be uploading it to the RIBA Future Architects YouTube playlist for everyone to access. We won't be taking live questions tonight, but we invite you to use the Q&A function to send us questions, comments, ideas, solutions, and we'll follow up with these after the event. We hope that the technology will work tonight, but if there are any problems, we will do our best to continue, and if it becomes impossible, we will contact you all to reschedule. We aim to finish tonight's event at 6 p.m, so let's get started. A little bit of an introduction from me. Tonight, we'll have a panel of guest speakers lined up for you, each speaking for about 5 minutes on a topic relevant to students of architecture in both education and those working in practice. The aim is that this event shares a snapshot of what's happening in education and what is happening in practice across the UK during this COVID-19 pandemic. We hope to provide useful information, insights, and reassurances, and hopefully some inspiration to see you through these difficult times. We also will have a question panel here. They've sent in their questions, and I'll be reading through the questions, and our question panel will be answering them. So to begin, I'll introduce each of our presenters, and they'll speak to us one after the other. So first up, we've got Nicky Watson. Nicky Watson is Director of JDDK Architects and is Chair of the RIBA Education Committee and is RIBA Trustee for Learning. Nicky is going to speak for about 5 minutes on her experiences of graduating during a recession. Over to you, Nicky.
Hi, thanks, Selasi. Hi, everybody, wherever you are. Future Architects asked me just to speak briefly about my experience of graduating during a recession, which I did do. And really what's a little bit about my experience of that and how it has panned out in the longer term. I'm just trying to share my screen with you guys. So I just need to make sure that's working. Here we go. Right, I hope you can see that now. Selasi, give me a nod if you can see that. Great, okay. This was a graph that was put out recently by the RIBA, which I thought was really interesting in terms of looking a little bit at the peaks and troughs that have happened in our industry in recent decades. Obviously, we're at the end of that that graph now. We're not sure quite yet where that red line for architects is going to go. But I think we're all pretty sure it's going down at the moment. But I just wanted to sort of highlight that in the context of the longer picture for our industry and the fact that we do have dips, but we also have recoveries as well, and we need to remember that. So this was me starting my architectural education in the distant past of 1986, and you can probably see at that point the work for architects was pretty good. It was on a rising curve, so all good. And then I graduated several years later, absolutely at the bottom of that trough. So that's the sort of context of my graduation in times of a recession. So I'm just going to stop sharing that now. So what happened? I was unemployed for 6 months after I graduated. My now husband, who was in that picture there, was unemployed for a year, and it was really tough. But we have both ended up employed. We both actually ended up getting really good experience, both during that period of unemployment and also once we got into the workplace. I got a job briefly in Durham. I trained in Newcastle, but then after 6 months there, I got a call from a friend of mine who was working in practice, who was at the same stage as me, and she said, "Quick, I think the guys at this place are taking on a new student. You know, get your CV in." I had already sent my CV to them previously, but I picked up the phone, phoned them, was invited for interview, got the job. And I've been at that practice for 27 years. 20 of those years I've been a director of that practice. So it worked out well for me in the end. And I think my experience of being unemployed in that initial period, and my husband's experience, was that actually it gave us an opportunity to sort of take stock, consider what was important to us. We both undertook courses. I think between us we did a BTEC in AutoCAD, which existed at the time. He did that, I didn't. I was still on pens and paper. A life drawing class, a philosophy class, a woodwork class. We both volunteered locally in our region in a couple of areas. And actually it was quite a precious time in hindsight. We've never had that sort of time to ourselves to consider those things since. So whilst it really was tough, there was a good story at the end of it. And briefly, just another quick sort of anecdote, I suppose. Another friend of mine, two great friends of mine who now run a very successful practice in Newcastle. When they graduated at the same time as me, they set themselves up in business as a sort of graphic, offering graphic services, not architectural services. And through that, they managed to pick up bits of work with various practices and ended up being mentored and overseen by a particular practice which allowed them to get their Part 3s. They then graduated and became chartered architects and now run a very successful practice themselves. So again, they found a different way through to get to their through their career. So I'll probably just leave it at that for now. I'm going to chip in with some questions and answers later, but I just thought that, well, Future Architects thought it was useful just to give a bit of context of a previous recession. So there you go.
Thank you very much, Nicky. That is definitely very, very useful information. I always find that having these sort of anecdotes and stories and people's journeys is very useful in helping to understand and apply that to our own current situations. Next, we have our second presenter, who's David Gloster. David Gloster is RIBA Director for Education, and he will cover how COVID-19 and lockdown can be channeled into a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So over to David.
Good evening. I don't have any slides. I'm going to ask three questions. One relates to old reality, the second relates to a new reality, and the third relates to opportunity. So my first question is, are recessions and pandemics really cyclic? Well, Nicky has laid the foundations for this, as she's extraordinarily much younger than I am. I actually graduated in the first of those recessions. The economist Schumpeter suggested that 7 years was the average length of the cycle between serious recessions. So in fact, you know, our last one was 11 years ago, so that was slightly off cycle. Before that, it was 28 years ago in 92. So the reality is actually we've been slightly off the Schumpeterian cycle. That's probably good news. The bad news is that there's an increased frequency of pandemics. And if you look at the history of pandemics alongside that of economic crisis, you'll find that in the mid-6th century, 50 million people died worldwide. When you think about what the world population was, that's quite a lot of people. And even within in the last 100 years, Spanish flu took 25 million. I'm not doing any comparison and contrast to suggest that what we're in now is trivial, but it's important that we understand that life as an earthling is beset by crisis. The good thing is that what do we learn? Well, we learn emotional and physical resilience. Being an architect, I think, requires a special kind of resilience. You have to be almost absurdly optimistic. It's tough. You know, architecture is the common factor which identifies culture and character of countries. But the problem is when the money supply stalls, as it invariably does in a crisis, clients start to rethink about how they're going to invest their money. And so in a recession, architecture, which is a luxury commodity, it's a fur coat. Oh, I'm not meant to say that. It's a luxury commodity, I don't know, like handmade shoes. It gets parked. So my second question is about new reality. And the question here is, well, is every aspect of this crisis bad? I've got a view on this, and I think it is that crisis means re-evaluation. I'm really, really chuffed about Sadiq Khan's car-free zones in London. I don't care if the taxi drivers think it's a land grab. It's a great restart of the identity of our cities. In Bogota, in the same timescale between the beginning of lockdown and now, they've created 75 miles of completely car-free streets and another 50 miles of bike lanes. That's extraordinary. That would never have happened in normal political process. So it means that when you reflect on your life and your circumstance in recession, design can thrive. Design defines and solves problems, and we're quite good at that as architects, it seems to me. But there's a very narrow window where we redefine the ethos, the operation and the health of future cities. But it does mean for everybody in practice and in education that we can define and generate a different and probably more ethical agenda for architectural education. So what can we learn? Well, within limits, time is at least as valuable to architects as money. We focus on what we really need. The health agenda is an agenda for climate intelligence. That's an absolute fact. The aeroplanes have left the sky and the sky is cleared. The fish are swimming up the Grand Canal in Venice. That's extraordinary. We've also learned another thing, which is if you have upwards only economic development targets, that's pretty inflexible and pretty damaging. And there is scope for the city to still work in our favour and not against us. The office and the rush hour are not givens. Actually, we can redefine a completely different way in which the city operates. So my final theme is one of opportunity. There's a wonderful poem called Summer Poem, which seems appropriate on a hot day, written by a former American poet laureate called Mary Oliver. And the last but one line, I think, of the poem says, "What is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" Your one wild and precious life. And Eisenhower, another American, a former president, said, well, plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. That's a really brilliant distinction. The health situation impacts everyone, but none of us have created it, and equally we can't solve it, but we can come out the other side with some pretty smart ideas. And it does mean that for anybody perhaps graduating or thinking, have I made a chronic mistake in going into architecture? In the short term, it's a fact, architecture may not be the option. I remember in 2009, the former head of the Strathclyde School, Gordon Murray, said, if you can't get a job in architecture, put the deck chairs out on a beach or sell ice cream. And he got absolutely taken to the cleaners on that. Now, my view is that was actually pretty smart advice, because what he was saying is engage with people, learn how people think, learn how you interact with them. Any experience where you deal with people is valuable. It's interesting, isn't it, that if you talk to animal behaviorists, they say that animals don't have any concept of self-pity. We do. An animal that's maybe got 3 legs doesn't think, oh God, my life is over. They adapt to climate, to injury, to location. So what can we learn from that? Open your thinking, scrap your original strategy, and invite real alternatives. If the cyclic lifestyle objective is working for an AJ top 10 architect, maybe put that idea on hold for a while. Maybe there's another alternative. Don't identify yourself as a victim ever. It's completely negative thinking. Think and act individual and, most importantly, collectively. Refresh your old alliances, all the mates that you're comfortable with, that's fine. Find some people who you might not be so comfortable with. Think about what you could do collectively. Success in anything is about relationships. Widen your circle, be audacious, be open-minded. Who's in your circle now? Who might want to be in your circle? People are very open to opportunity and approaches in recession. Team up with older and younger people, those you know and get to know. Work with smart and resourceful doers. Ask practices, in fact, any organisation, how you can be useful to them. It might be putting the rubbish out. It might be setting up an alternative to the Taiwanese Production Information Office with half a dozen of you in your dad's garage. I don't know, but act on what they say. Listen, create the opportunity, work collectively and work well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David. Next, we will have Sara Shafiei. Sara is Program Director at Bartlett School of Architecture, and we'll be getting a view from an education perspective from her, how universities and higher education organisations are working with students online, and especially the impacts of the impacts for the class of 2020. Over to you, Sara.
Thank you, Selasi. I hope you can hear me. I hope you can hear me. David, that was brilliant. I think you've stolen some of my lines, so I will try to steal some back in the next 5 minutes. I guess I'm going to give you a slice of life since March. And in any other normal circumstances, it wouldn't be very, very thrilling. But the last 2.5 months have been a roller coaster, I'm sure, for everyone listening and watching. So I'm going to share some slides. So hopefully Kate can share them with you. Can you see them? Brilliant. OK, so first things first. The basics haven't changed. We are not suddenly going to go into the computer and become self-isolated for the rest of our lives. We've got to work collaboratively. We've got to think positively about where we're going to go. And our role as architects is always to think positively. I think David said optimistic. I would also add positive. I think we're the most positive people I know. And in these times, we have to think about the positives. So what are the positives that have come out in the last 2.5 months? I think it's been extraordinary what I've seen through my students, what I've seen through academics, and what I've seen through all designers across the board. The old ways aren't necessarily the best. I think we need to stop being nostalgic. I think actually academics are far more nostalgic than students have been, and we've got to really be critical of where we have come from and seek the opportunities of where we can go. I think we're closer than ever. We've become a bit of an extended family. We share each other's homes. We care more deeply about each other. I've met parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, cats, dogs, you name it. And every single of my students has managed to be in every part of my home, have tea, breakfast, lunch, dinner. So in a way, this is a wonderful, wonderful thing that has emerged from this. And working together is an amazing thing to remember and take forward. I think students in a way have become a bit more confident. They're attending more meetings. They ask more questions than ever before. Their costs have been somehow reduced, you could say. There's no more printing. Their drawings are ready. They're on time. There's no pin-up issues. There's no room clashes. There's all sorts of wonderful things that have emerged. And I think the move to blended teaching has offered us an opportunity to really increase our accessibility and inclusion. as well as look at student autonomy and where we want to go. We've also been able to diversify our exposure to different architects from around the world, while not increasing our carbon footprint, which is incredible. But what we do now, I really think, can shape the future. And it's really not about being the best digital teaching institution. I think it's much deeper than that. It's about the content and advancing our delivery. What can we do that can really shape the future? What can we learn from now to become more ethical, allow more independence for our students, and give them really the confidence to believe in their ideas? So really, as David said, this is now an opportunity for us. We shouldn't simply aim to continue to the usual trajectory of digital form in response to the current crisis. I think we need to adapt and mitigate and produce new models for future architectural education and also practice.
Great, thank you so much.
I've got a few more slides. I hope I've not gone over 5 minutes to just share with you. I thought this would be a wonderful opportunity to show you some stories from what students, academics are doing in the last 2.5 months. So I've called it Busy Little Bees. So it's just a reflection of some things going on at the Bartlett. So, I mean, as soon as the crisis hit in March, a group of students and academics got together. They started 3D printing personal protective masks for hospitals in Spain, which was amazing to see. Use of what's going on in the workshop being made to use on a current really, really relevant issue. People have been doing research, looking at pavements not being wide enough for social distancing, criticising the government on some issues, but also helping the government make decisions on other issues. There's also been amazing support from students getting together and supporting one another. Radio stations have been set up where students can talk about anything but their projects. Breakfast clubs, lunch clubs, dinner clubs, yoga classes, you name it. And they've been lovely enough to allow us into some of these sessions. There's also been an amazing thing set up by the MNG group, which is a global map that pins every student who wants to be pinned and every academic across the globe. It means that at any one point, I can, if I'm in a moment of crisis, if I need some help, can look at who the nearest person is to me, and I can tap into that. It can also mean that when someone taps out without letting us know, we can keep an eye on what's happened and provide them with as much support as possible. So this global connection between us has also been incredible to see. But also, again, going back to family, we really have become a family. And there's been a new amazing culture of care. And I think this is something that we have to take forward in the future in all parts of the academic life. We've set up lectures from across the globe that doesn't cost anything and brings more people together than ever before. But also, if you think about workshops, which is one of the facilities that I think students miss the most, workshop has even reinvented itself. At the Bartlett BMAID have set up booklets on how to take photographs at home, what different materials mean, how to use what you've got at home to make the most of it. This is invaluable information that I wish I had as a student or as an academic now. Things that we can learn from that can take us into whether we set up practices or go on to do other things. And I think I'd like to end with that our curriculum really is a reflection of our common interests. And it is really, really important that we seize the opportunity right now to make changes, more relevant changes in this time so that it can really impact our future. And they say in the toughest times, creative people get creative. So I think we have to start getting creative. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that wonderful commentary and presentation. We're running a little bit behind, but I've been so taken by all of your comments so far that I have not been wanting to cut you all off, not to stop everybody listening in from receiving the wonderful bits of knowledge and great gems that you lot, everyone is sharing today. Without further ado, though, I would like to invite our next speaker, Victoria Adegoke, who is RIBA National Council Student Representative, and she's going to be talking about what support is available to students during COVID-19. Over to you, Victoria.
Hi, good evening everyone. I hope everyone's having a great day, enjoying the sunshine if it's sunny where you are. I'm going to talk really briefly about what the RIBA has for students, that is students in Part 1, 2 and 3, and those who are also recently qualified architects. A little bit about myself. I recently graduated in 2019, my Part 2. I'm now currently doing my Part 3, working for a practice in Manchester. And my thoughts for wanting to be part of the National Council were really driven by understanding and encouraging more support for students as they're going through their studies, and also making more of the things that the RIBA are already doing aware and increasing the value for us. So there's two kind of categories I'm going to talk about. The first thing is a practical support and advice, and then also thinking about what you can do for the future. So main thing is to remember that there are lots of organizations and communities and groups that already exist that we can be a part of. There's the RIBA, there's Future Architects, there's also your own practice or your university. There's also regional RIBA communities and societies that we can all become members of. And then there are other national architecture societies, as well as speaking to the government and your local council. So I'll talk firstly about well-being. The Architects Benevolent Society is a really great organisation that works to support architects and students with their mental health and also their emotional well-being. They have an email and a phone hotline which you can call into, or you can send an email with how you're feeling or to get some advice. And they have a one-to-one counselling opportunity for you. You just need to email them or give them a phone call, and that can be arranged. They also provide some financial advice for those who might be looking at redundancy or loss of some income. So they provide a whole range of mental and emotional support for you. And there's also Future Architects, which is hosting this event tonight. And Future Architects is a network for future and emerging architects. And really the work that Future Architects is doing is to support and continue to provide creative online and physical content for us through all your career and in the industry. So currently we have a vlog series that you can find on the YouTube page, which has lots of conversations and opinions about currently what's happening with coronavirus and also what future architects might look like post-corona. And then we have podcasts, there's practical CV and portfolio advice as well. There's also the PDR system. There's a brand new PDR system that the team have recently launched, and currently there are a few hiccups, but most people have been able to log in, and the RIBA is encouraging students to continue to fill in your PDR. If you're in practice and you've been furloughed, there is a requirement of just 20 hours per week, which is actually 2.5 days. So that's not necessarily a problem if you're not working full-time or you have part-time hours now. You can still fill it in. You can do CPDs, you can observe practice projects that are still continuing right now. You can still fill in your PDR, so don't think of this time as wasted or that it's going to be blank. And if you're doing your, if you're doing your part 3, you can continue speaking with your practice about the project that you're doing for your case study, continue learning, continue meeting with your study group. There's really no reason for us to stop. I think it is a bit difficult to find motivation, but you're not the only one in the situation, and we're all in this together, as everybody has been saying so far. And then there's also competitions. You can enter lots of competitions internationally. There's the RIBA eyeline competition. The deadline, I think, is the 8th of June, so you have about a week and a half to get your submission in. If you're a student, you can submit your final drawings, and it's really a great opportunity for you to showcase who you are in your work. And lastly, there's a bit of financial help that the RIBA and other organisations can provide. These mainly for the RIBA are cyclical, so have a look at the deadlines. Also look at the eligibility criteria, because some things you have to have specific criteria to gain access to, but these are all still going on, so have a look on the RIBA website on architecture.com. Also, regarding student finance and your student loan, these government advice says that you can still apply as normal. You can email, and your student loan should not be affected currently. So if you're having any doubts or worries about that, you can contact them, and you should still be able to get your summer maintenance loan as normal. So the main takeaway is just keep being involved with your PDR. Don't stop doing it. Obviously, if you're not working, you can still do CPD, you can still get involved, and you can still learn and research and continue exploring and expanding your knowledge. As everybody said, you know, the opportunity that we have right now is that we have a lot more free time. So keep getting involved and keep speaking to one another. And there's lots of international and regional communities and organisations to be a part of. So I hope that's a bit helpful. Answering some questions later on if you have any regarding support and PDR and all of that. But yeah, hope you enjoy the rest of the event.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Next we have Harbinder Birdi. I'm pleased to welcome Harbinder, who's partner at Hawkins Brown, to share what impact the pandemic has had on practices and his view on short to medium term recovery. Harbinder, over to you.
Thanks, Selasi. I think it's been interesting watching how well the professionals adapted. We're a practice of 280. I think we've got 90 part ones and part twos, and they've adapted the best. I mean, the oldies have really sort of struggled in terms of like setting up their computers, but the younger ones, I mean, that's what they were doing at college all the time, and they'd be really nimble. And the first thing that every practice has done is made sure that the people, their talent, are well. And that's what we've been doing. We've been sort of making these connections where through Teams and Zoom, etc., we've been talking to each other, and then we've been talking to our clients. And what we realize is that across the whole industry, the engineers, the contractors, the developers, they all have a laptop. They all can work from home. 5 years ago, all the big engineers actually designed their offices to work remotely. So essentially that infrastructure always exists. What's happened now is that it's just been accelerated. So Teams and Zooms are just upgrading their software all the time to make the way that we communicate more efficient. Regarding work, I mean, when you say short term is actually sort of like 3 month look ahead. That's usually what practices like to see in terms of cash flow. And then midterm is like 6 to 9 months. And I think it depends on the sector, and it depends on the work that the practice does. If you were used to designing airports and hotels and cinemas, it's going to be tough, because all those clients now are completely reevaluating how people fly and whether they actually need to expand their airport. We're actually designing stations where the client is saying, actually, there's not going to be a morning and an evening peak, so do we need to make this station bigger at all? Because the distribution is going to be spread more evenly. But what that means is that they are still considering it. And I think there is a short-term blip where everybody finds their feet. But essentially, we have to look at the government, and the government at the moment, who is trying to fight a pandemic, as a parallel, what they're still looking to do is invest, and they're looking to invest in the regions. You know, it's not just in London, which generates the most taxes. They're looking to invest in the Midlands and the North and in Scotland. So there's opportunity for various sectors, and I think those sectors will be various things like residential. There's not enough housing, there never has been, so that will be built. There will be infrastructure. People are cycling now more. They've realised that actually the car isn't king. And also, they are working in different ways. And so when I go to the coffee shops in West London, where I live, and I talk to the people that serve me a coffee with a big queue, I say, you know that Monday to Friday, you're going to be as busy as Saturday? And they look at me and they go, what do you mean? I go, well, 35% of white collar workers are never going to go into work 4 days a week. Where do you think they're going to buy their coffee? So they're going to buy it in the local high street. So the local councils now are actually saying that, oh, this is great because we have this footfall where people are spending money in the outer boroughs rather than just in the centre. And generally, if you look at people sort of, you know, we've realised that we're as productive, if not more productive, because people haven't got the commute, they're not travelling. And so what firms are going to do is how they interact, and that is how they design. I always wonder, are you in 2 years' time going to be able to spot a COVID building, a building that was designed in COVID? And that is the biggest challenge, I think, for the design industry is that we crave interactions. That's what we strive for, is those sort of connections that we make as we're sort of walking around the studio. How do we make that happen over the next 6 months? Because I think the true test of a good practice is the ones that they can communicate and they can keep that dialogue going with their sort of collective creative scene. So I think there are definitely opportunities, but it's for every practice to adapt to the top opportunities that exist that they target. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much on that insight. I think is very, very, very useful to get that perspective. We have next up Tara Gbolade, who's our final guest speaker and co-founder of Gbolade Design Studio. She'll be talking about the longer term view on practice's ability to bounce back and how the future will be changed by COVID-19. Over to you, Tara.
Thanks very much, Selasi. I just echo that, yeah, the presentation so far have been brilliant. So thank you very much for setting this section up. I guess there are three main points that I'd like to get across in this little chat. One is, never in history has there been a time where so much value can be derived from so little labor. And that means that everything you do can go so much further than was ever possible. As a recurring theme, I graduated in the last session. And I think it's important actually in recognizing the period in which you're in. I think one thing that graduating in a recession taught me certainly was I shouldn't take for granted the concept that there'll always be a job waiting. And I think it really changed my mindset to being the creator and author of whatever my destiny was going to be. What that means, I guess, hopefully for you, is that this gives you an ability or the opportunity to really ground yourself in what's going on in society today, and actually start to become an expert in whatever it is you're passionate about, because that skill will be required in the near future, if not now. One thing I'd say, certainly as a practice, we, particularly at the moment, of course, we get a lot of applications for jobs, and I say that because of the audience we're speaking with. But one thing that I think is worth noting is that a lot of students and applicants usually say, this is what I can do, this is what I can do. I think this is the opportunity for you to demonstrate it, not just say what you can do, but demonstrate it. If you're using a building, if you're using a space, if you're using a piece of green infrastructure, if you think, well, someone should do something about this, that is you, and this is your time, because never again are you, well, depending on when the next pandemic is, but it's never again will you have this much time potentially to be able to make quite an impact with the little time that we have. Another option is also to turn up as a client, turn up with a client if you're going to rock up to an architectural practice and ask them for some work. You're walking around your neighborhoods and cycling around your neighborhoods probably more than you ever have. And if you've gone past a community center or a school that you thought looked a little bit decrepit and the brickwork was coming off, well, walk into that community center, walk into that school and say, actually, we can help you. And even if you don't have the skills, you can turn up to your nearest architectural practice and say, hey, by the way, I think I've nabbed your client. Mind if I work on it? The second point is diversify your approach. This is not as controversial as it's going to sound, but shatter, I guess, all the thoughts of what you think an architect ought to do and what an architect ought to be. Particularly when I came out of university, was very much working within the red lines of buildings, but remembering that actually opportunities work outside the red lines. You might have a red line boundary, but that doesn't stop how people use the spaces between your building entrance and the pavement and the nearest park. So think beyond your red line, in effect. COVID requires us to live in a new normal, and you get the advantage of being there. So some practical advice: yes, look for architectural practices or architectural opportunities if you want, but definitely encourage you to look at contracting communities. Contracting, for example, we saw the graph actually earlier of how, hopefully you can also hear and see me, but we saw the graph earlier of how the architect's life changes in accordance with recessions, but actually you would have seen construction which was a little bit more steady all the way through. So actually look at walking into a contractor company and saying, actually, how can I offer my services? Think about being a client, work with housing associations, with local authorities, because at the end of the day, all these people employ architects. So wouldn't it be great if you came from the client's side, understood that, and then go back into architecture at a later point, should you feel the need to? Planning, work as a planner. There used to be a time where we had chief architects within the planning departments, and there's so many more opportunities for that now. So my point being this, do not limit yourself to what you think an architect ought to do, because the world is far more expansive and your skills are far more expansive. Graphic design, website design, be someone who other architects need, for example. My final point, hopefully I'm not too much over time, my final point is this: don't look for work, create it. There's a lot of, you know, read a lot. And when I say read, do not read architectural books, read business books. Monzo came and changed the bank scene. I grew up going into a physical bank, and now I couldn't tell you where my nearest one was. So that's something that the world does. Instagram was sold to Facebook for $1 billion, I believe, with only 13 staff. That's the power of the place you're in right now. So don't look for work, create it. Create apps, right? We personally, as a practice, we created apps. And that was with a full-time job, learning to code in the evenings. And for you students out there, it's called the My Part 3 app. Download it for free on the iOS. Look at property development as an option. Find sites that need work being done to it, take it to an architectural practice or take it to a potential client. Product manufacturing, we're coming into an age where offsite manufacturing will be used much more. Take advantage of that, learn. Create programs like Test Fit or Prism.io. You're an architect, you understand how space works, but actually, can you program the tools that we as architects use? So while we're here all using ArchiCAD or Revit or Autodesk or whatever, could you be the one who creates that? Finally, just a sentence, which is the future of practices and architects is based on our ability to adapt to our changing environment. It's important that we recognize that and we capitalize on that, and in fact become the drivers of the change we want to see. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Brilliant gems there. I hope you're all taking notes. I've heard some amazing things from all of our speakers tonight, and I hope you've all found it very, very useful. I'm not going to dwell too much. I could also say a whole load of things, but I'll move swiftly on because we're running a little bit behind now. I want to say thank you to all of our speakers. Like I said, we've covered a lot of ground. Before we move on to our questions, I wanted to remind people to use a Q&A function to post any comments, questions, insights, solutions, and yeah, we'll pick those up later on and disseminate information about that separately. We'll use your comments to improve our offer as well as the Future of Architects, the Future Architects Network. I want to also announce that the RIBA have launched a new design competition. I believe Victoria made mention of that earlier. It's open to all RIBA members, including students, and the theme is Rethink 2025, Design for Life After COVID-19. The competition is sponsored by Arup, and the winner will receive £5,000. If you are currently studying with an RIBA validated School of Architecture, you are eligible to join as an RIBA member for free. So we would like to encourage you to be part of the wider architecture community through this membership. You can easily join online, and we'll post the link in the Q&A section. For those who don't yet know, the RIBA Future Architects is a networking community for future and emerging architects, designed to support and inspire and provide a voice as you transition from study to practice. Since launching it in January, the network has facilitated a new webpage, podcasts, vlogs, digital resources, and events like this. RIBA would like to gather your feedback on the programme to inform future planning. We'll add a survey link and the Q&A to the Q&A section, and we'd like to encourage you all to fill in that survey and give us your thoughts on the programme so far. Okay, moving swiftly on, I'm going to go on to the questions. I will read you out some questions that have been pre-selected, and these questions will be directed at some of our presenters that presented earlier. So the first question is from Colin Rogger, and he is studying his Part 1 at Newcastle University, and the question is for Harbinder and Nicky. Colin's question is as follows: We're all worried about getting year-out jobs. Will practices be recruiting? Will our final grades and quality of our work be taken into consideration? And how can we prepare a great portfolio? So I will go to Nicky first, and then followed by Harbinder to answer that question, please. Over to Nicky.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Selasi. I think some of the speakers already have talked about different sectors of our industry and how certain sectors are likely to be affected positively and negatively as a result of the pandemic. So I think practices will be recruiting. Some practices won't. You know, I think there is, you know, you're all really good researchers. You learn how to research when you're at university, and I think this is the perfect time to be doing that. You know, researching which practices are working in which sectors are buoyant at the moment, where the predictions are. There's so much information out there, podcasts and articles and so forth discussing these things. So use your research skills and find out, you know, which of those sectors and look for the jobs in those sectors. From my own personal experience, I would say, you know, if you do have more time in your hands, well, what a perfect time to perhaps, you know, improve your portfolio and you know, spend a bit more time on it if you've got a bit more time. But also, I think for me, when I recruit staff, I'm looking for the person as much as the architecture. I'm looking for somebody who, you know, has good communication skills, has good empathy, who can work well in a team, who is responsible and reliable, and all of those transferable skills. And so I think, as you know, as well as building your portfolio of architectural work, I would encourage you to build your portfolio of personal experience and personal projection. So, you know, if in 6 months' time you're looking for work, and in those 6 months since graduating, perhaps you have been volunteering for your local community somewhere, perhaps you have been collaborating with a group of people to develop an innovative project around some IT, or you know, all the things that the other speakers have been talking about. I think that's just as important as your project work in your portfolio. So if you have time on your hands, I would focus on those things as well as actually drawings and so forth. Harbinder?
Thank you, Harbinder.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with all of that. I think it's going to be, I mean, if you look at what practices are doing at the moment, is that normally with Part 1s, they come in July, and then what happens is a renewal. So in August, they typically all leave. And what would normally happen is that you would then employ Part 1s in that sort of 1 year cycle, and then you'd have a handful of Part 2s as well. I think because there is uncertainty over the next few months, and people are being sort of furloughed, etc., and people are reviewing opportunities in the market, I think it's probably fair to say that things are probably going to be, there's probably going to be more confidence in later on in between like September and October. Actually, people will know the work that they can acquire that will sustain employing people. So I think what you do need to do is be very, very nimble. I mean, you're all very, very connected now. In my day, you know, I'd have to send a letter or knock on the door, whereas you've got LinkedIn, etc. And you've got, my hot tip to you is to all know people in those practices that you really want to work for. And what's difficult now more than ever is actually finding what you can't do now. You won't be able to just go into a studio and show your portfolio for the next few months. What you're going to have to do is have a portfolio that looks great online that you can send, that somebody else is able to review. And there is going to be lots of that going on. So the contacts that you have and the opportunities that you find where you think practices are in sectors that are growing, they're the ones to target. And so just monitor and make as many connections in the industry as possible. And generally, if you speak to the industry, what everybody wants to do, all my part twos, young architects in the office are saying, oh, we're going to be taking on part ones. Can we mentor the part ones? Can we touch base with them? So the practices realize that what we do need to do is that in the next few months, it might be tough, but we want to recruit the best people for our business as soon as the market picks up. And we want to keep those connections with that talent. So what you do need to do is somehow make those links as soon as you can and keep the dialogue going.
Great, I think that's brilliant advice. I think in terms of scarcity of work and how that might be overcome, particularly for part one students, that thing of being nimble and being open to sort of trying things differently, and that thing of just creating connections in the first place. And you never know where those connections could get you. Even if someone's not able to offer you a job right now, create those connections and doors will open sometime sooner, hopefully, rather than later. We're going to go on to a question from Abigail Patel, who's an architectural assistant at Buttress Architects and is doing her part two. Her question is for David and Victoria. Question is, for those of us in practice but on furlough, what can we usefully be doing, and what sort of things can contribute to my professional development, and how do we get PDR signed off? I'm going to go over to Victoria first and then over to David. If we can keep it concise, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Hi, Selasi, thank you. I mentioned a few of these practical things that we can be doing with our PDR, especially for your part three. The main things is to remember that it's a 20-hour minimum of professional experience that you need. So that's literally 2.5 days if you're working a 7.5-day work week. So that's very doable. If you are able to do CPDs, if you're able to do shadowing and observing of current projects that are hopefully still going on in your practice, even if it's not the project that's your case study, you are able to put down an observer role, and those hours do count towards it. You should also maintain contact with your practice to keep the conversation going, to keep your learning going. Some other things you can look into are research. You can maybe undertake a short research project and write about that. Write about possibly how the practice itself is coping in a business point of view, how the projects contractually are going. And you can just keep increasing your learning, especially in this very interesting situation. I'm personally in this situation myself. I'm keeping contact with my study group. We're still meeting every week. We're still going through exam papers and exam questions. These are all things that even though you're not necessarily working, you can still write about in the PDR. And obviously when it comes to the exam time, we're still sort of touch and go how the exams are going to be in October or September. Everyone's still just trying to understand what it will look like. But I would suggest keep preparing as if the exam will go ahead. And if it doesn't go ahead in time, you're still prepared for when you can retake it. So definitely don't stop. I know it's hard to keep motivated, but stay in contact with your peers, with your practice and your mentors, and hopefully it will keep you going, really. But yeah, David, if you've got any extra things.
I don't have a great deal more to add, but I think there's an extraordinary opportunity to be able to monitor a practice from a position in furlough as they actually adapt to the next 3, 6, 9 months and make plans for the future, because nobody's just going to lie on their back and say, I give up. You know, we're not like that. That's not the professional mentality. We'll bust the gut to keep going, and we're very, very stubborn in that respect because of the positivity that Sara talked about earlier. So I think keep in touch with the practice, ask whether you can still shadow the projects, but actually also record what they're doing to keep the wheels on that bus. And actually, I'd also be dead cheeky. I'll try and contact other practices and say, look, I'm on furlough at the moment. I've got a bit of time in my hands, it happens. could you give me access to how you're keeping the wheels on your bus? Because people are very, very open to opportunity in crisis. You know, they start to see new possibilities which they wouldn't have entertained, and they'll answer mails, they'll answer telephones, calls that they might not have done previously. I think you've got to be audacious. I think you've got to be completely lateral, and I think you've got to. Tara used the great phrase, you know, make yourself somebody that architects need and want, and I think that's a really, really great way to look at it. In terms of the signing off. You know, there's the wonderful world of the digital signature. I don't think that's a problem in itself, but actually you could probably get about 6 or 9 months of the most interesting PEDRable experience that will get any PSA sitting up and begging for more.
Thank you very much for that contribution. Next, there's a question from Simeon Stebanu. I always get Simeon's name wrong. Simeon, you're going to have to forgive me. Simeon is a PhD student from Birmingham City, and his question is for Nicky Watson. Simeon's question is, in light of this year's Mental Health Awareness Week theme of kindness, what practical skills do future architects need to develop so as to produce designs which are kind to the environment? Over to you, Nicky.
Thanks, Simeon. That's a big one, isn't it? Well, I mean, what I should say is that you guys have got, you know, you guys are the future of solving this problem that unfortunately my generation and my generations before us have left you with. The work that you've probably been and ideas you've probably been exposed to in your schools of architecture are probably already pushing you in the right direction for meeting these challenges. I think again there is so much available. You be a researcher and find the information. It'll be out there. I think one of the useful documents that you could use as a sort of initial bit of guide is the RIBA 2030 Climate Challenge document, which you can find online. And that is set into certain metrics which are being measured, like embodied carbon, operational energy, water usage, and so forth. And I think if you start taking each one of those as an individual subject matter and a subject for research, you will find areas of learning opportunity online to build your skills in those areas, and you'll probably find fairly quickly you'll get more knowledgeable about them than a lot of people who are in practice at the moment. So again, this is an opportunity to use your time to do that. And of course, being kind to the environment means being kind to each other as well. I think we've talked about that. A few of us have talked about that. I think this experience is perhaps shifting the dial a little bit in society as to, you know, reviewing what we think is important and how do we live with each other in a more supportive environment. Again, you know, how architecture, what its social impact is, what its impact on mental well-being is all part of that sort of kindness to the environment. A good place to start is a book by Ben Chatton called Happy by Design, a really lovely little book which just goes through design, how design affects our mental well-being, and I think that's a great place to start for looking at that sort of thing. So again, I just encourage you to become the experts. You can do it, and you can engage with people who are already experts in those fields and learn from them. Just, you know, the same thing we've talked about before: research, contacts, and developing your own voice is what this opportunity gives you.
Great, thank you very much. Last question we have from Rachel Marshall, studying Part 2 at the University of Nottingham, and is an architectural assistant at Marber Architects. I'll pose this question to Tara and Sara. The way we perceive the workplace has changed as we shift to working from the home during the lockdown. What lessons do you think can be learnt from this to improve the way we design workplaces and homes of the future? And also, Harbinder, if you wanted to come in on this as well. I'll start with Tara. Thank you.
Thanks. Good question. I will probably focus on the resi section and housing. Obviously, we're all working from home much more, and well, we have no choice. But also, hopefully, we recognize the context and the state of our current properties, whether they're poorly insulated, whether they might be dual aspect and warm on one side and cold on the other side. This is an opportunity for us to rethink the quality of housing, the quality of the built environment, but also the quality of placemaking, the quality of the spaces around us. The amenity space, for example, that we would have previously designed in shade, which isn't used most of the time, or the way we face busy roads, and not really thinking about maybe mixed mode ventilation systems that don't require us to open our front-facing windows. It gives us basically the opportunity to rethink about how currently our homes are working for us or not, and how in the future, when we're developing, say, blocks of flats, maybe we can think of incorporating co-working spaces on the ground floor of many of these, because while many people might not be physically going into central London or wherever to work, they might still want and require that space that's away from their flat, for example, to spend some time and maybe socially distantly engage with other people around them. So there are plenty of opportunities, I think, from experiencing our daily lives. And I think the question, I think, is really critical for us to keep asking ourselves is that as we experience daily life, what is the problem? What is the problem? What is the problem? And then when you think someone should come up with a solution, recognize that you are that someone is what I'd say.
Okay, great. Harbinder, would you like to also contribute anything to that question?
Yeah, I was just going to maybe talk about how it might impact the workplace. I think if you look at current occupancy rates in offices at the moment, I think there's something like 70–80% based on this sort of open plan working where you're hot desking. And I think that might be reduced to 50%. The thing is that we are social beings. And this is just in the creative industry. This is in all industries. And all the friends that I have that are writers who sit like hermits at home writing sort of books and novels and column pieces. Actually, all the stuff that they gain is from walking the streets and talking to people. They are constantly having dinners every single night because that's where they get their content. And I think as a designer and as people in the creative industries, we're the same. So I think what's going to be interesting is developers changing their portfolio to allow for people to come, to interact, to work in various ways. But what can't be denied is the productivity, in the sense of when people are working from home, when you haven't got the fatigue on the commute, is actually the productivity has really skyrocketed. However, the interaction has dropped, and that's what there will be. There will be this sort of interesting play between moments of productivity where you really inspire and actually coming together. And I think what that will do will shape our cities as well. What I don't think will happen is that we'll have specific homes that are built. I think they will be allowed to be, because what we need to do is shape our environments around how we want to use them, rather than having somebody foist upon us ways of sort of like working. So I think things are going to be more flexible, we're going to be more responsive, and I think that will engage the profession in particular a lot more.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that contribution as well. On that point, we will draw the meeting to a close. A few things from me. I just want to say thank you so much to the question panel and to the main speakers, and for all those who sent in questions. I do hope that you all have been using the Q&A function. I would also like to thank everybody for attending this meetup this evening, and we hope it's been very useful to all of you and inspiring and provided food for thought in challenging this opportunity, as opposed to seeing it as a challenge in itself. Please take 10 minutes to complete the Future Architects survey, and remember to join the RIBA student membership if that applies to you. There's loads of different categories of membership, so do find out which is the most appropriate for you. And yeah, thank you again for joining today. There's so much I wish I could say as well. I think that so many gems and golden nuggets that have been spoken about by each of our presenters today. Think outside of the box, seek opportunities where other people aren't necessarily looking. Create opportunities for yourself is something that I always try to say. I myself graduated in quite a tricky time in 2012 and found it extremely difficult to find work. And yeah, navigated it through just trying to think outside the box and creating connections. I now know a host of amazing people up and down the built environment industry, and I'm very thankful for those connections that I've made, which have opened different doors for me across in the early stages of my career so far. I'm currently working in the public sector as well, another place where I would never have really thought to enter in. But like has been said by some of our speakers before, the public sector is somewhere that is really seeking new talent, and there's so many opportunities for us to use our sort of problem solving thinking that we come out of architectural school with in so many different ways. So yeah, break the boundaries and think outside the box. Thank you all for joining. Stay safe and good night. Thank you very much.